Welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you guys doing? Another episode, another edition of Brockettology. And again, I am here with another great guest. You've seen him before, Steven Gorgei. And now we're in the college football playoffs. So I had to get him because when we were talking about the committee, there were some teams on this list that we were just like, who should be in, who should be out. And one of those teams got exposed last week for the holidays. And now we are here again. So, Gorgie, welcome to the new approved and new edition of Brockettology.
I love it. Brockettology. It's perfect. It seems like it was so obvious. It was just sitting there. I'm glad you found it.
And so this is where we are, Brockettology, where we discuss all things sports. And obviously, college football is the world that we live in and that we love. And now we have four. Before we start with these four, I want to go backwards just a little bit. Quarterfinals. How did you respond? How do you feel now that we are here? And was there any game that was probably the most surprising?
I feel great. Here's the thing for me, Darius, and I put out a video the morning. I guess it must have been New Year's Eve morning, where I said, like, look, guys, all I've heard for the last month is whine and complain and moan, and this team should have been in, and if they were in, they would have gotten here, and why is this team in? Why is that team in? And there were so many blowouts in the first round. I said, look, guys, I am so excited for these four quarterfinal games. There was a time in our lives, not that long ago at all, where we would have had Indiana versus Georgia in a national championship game, and that's it. We never would have seen any of these other games. Instead, we
Cello.
get four top 10 games, four games that would have been the headliner game in any week of the regular season. We got four of them over a 36-hour period. So I have been loving all of it. I think the football has been really good. As far as what my takeaways are, what has surprised me. So what has surprised me? Ole Miss has to be the biggest surprise to me. I A lot of people doubted Indiana throughout this season. I feel like I was the same way about Ole Miss because we've seen Ole Miss time and time and time again where they can kind of get right to the precipice. They can get right to the brink and they can't quite get over the hump. They can't quite get over the edge. And I felt like last year was the year for them with that front seven. They lost a lot of those guys. Jackson Dart, of course, goes to the NFL. And you think like, okay, we saw Austin Simmons last year. He had a moment there when he had to come in relief. I think this guy could be
Yeah.
pretty good. Then he gets hurt. Trinidad Chambliss comes out of nowhere. He's been unbelievable. But even with all of that and that amazing story and how good he's been, I still kind of felt like, okay, it's kind of the same old Ole Miss. Well, I don't really believe in them. I don't think their defense is good enough. Of course, you got all the coaching stuff going on. I said Kirby Smart versus Pete Golding, who, no offense to him, no disrespect to him, but to be coaching in your second ever game as a head coach, going up against Kirby Smart, in my opinion, the best coach in all of college football in the Sugar Bowl, in the playoff, that's a huge disadvantage. I did not think they had a shot to win that game, and they proved me wrong. So to me, that was clearly the biggest surprise.
There's part of me that wanted to agree with you, but I did believe in Ole Miss, and I believed in them in the regular season, and it wasn't because of this insert Trinidad Chambliss. It was just Lane Kiffin is has built this roster, and again, being the portal king, and I know now with everything that's went on, it's Pete Golding's team, but we will not forget Lane Kiffin assembled this roster. Lane Kiffin called in Trinidad in the spring and how he got there last minute and finally got this team all off to the races. And then Charlie Weiss Jr. doing an amazing job as offensive coordinator. So Ole Miss was a team that probably around like the week 6, 7 mark, I was like, oh, they can do some damage. I will say this: the surprising part of it all for me has been Miami. And I know it's weird because people, when they hear me say I'm a Miami fan, they would think, oh, you don't have faith. I'm like, no, it always, you've heard me say this every time. I said this to multiple people. I said it came down to Carson Beck and his arm. How good was his arm going to be when he's coming off that UCL injury? And we now find out with Shannon Dawson that he finally started feeling healthier and stronger on the back end of the season. So you're telling me these entire weeks that he was playing against Notre Dame, Florida, Florida State, and hell, I'll throw in South Florida because they were ranked at that time. You're having all these ranked tough matchups in the beginning half of the season. You're only operating what at maybe 75, 80% strength. And now we get to see what this looks like, and he's healthier. And then the Miami offense and Mario Cristobal himself is what I didn't fully believe in. As same way with Lane Kiffin, I think those two are in the same bed of just like you're on the precipice, you're always close, you're always there. There's something happen, and Miami has been the butt of the joke for a while, where they stole the verb Clemsoning, and it almost became Miami, where it was just like you fumble against Georgia Tech, then you have this moment, and then Cam Ward last year in that game against
Oh,
Syracuse.
that Syracuse game.
Yeah,
Oh, the
so
Syracuse game.
you are always one step away, and then now you finally get in on a random. Okay, we just need somebody to be in. Clearly, the committee finally saw the head to head, and then not only did they get in, they looked impressive in both games. They were underdogs. Both games, yes, I'll call them road games. The second one, even though it's neutral site, but it's probably a majority Ohio State crowd there because Buckeyes fans travel the way they do. And your defense, something that was a complete problem the year before in terms of secondary, is one of the biggest bright spots that has held
Yeah.
two great teams or two good teams in check. So I'm with you in that same aspect where it just happens to flip. And I think the Fiesta Bowl is going to be really good. And then even I look at Oregon, a lot of these questions that were concerns about some of these high profile teams like a Georgia, like a Ohio State, like a Oregon, hell, even a Alabama in those moments where you're going to have a new quarterback for the first time. And I think Dante Moore has took the spotlight and handled it really well and performed somewhat above and beyond expectations. He does still have games that are quirky, but he's performed really well to keep that offense afloat. And I give Dan Lanning all the freaking credit in the world. Like you assembled this roster to not only combat what you did last year, but also somewhat come back a little bit more improved on the defensive side of the ball. Mateo Uiagalelei, a freaking star. You get Decorian Moore as your freshman standout at receiver, and then you have Sadiq Bey, not Sadiq Bey, but the
Kenyon
tight
Sadiq.
Kenyon Sadiq. There we go. Like you have him coming in as at the tight end spot, and he's just phenomenal. So everyone deserves credit here, and I do think when we finally say play it on the field, we have the four best teams remaining. Nothing looks out of order. Nothing looks out of place. You have a Indiana team that's thumped almost anybody that's came their way. So I ask you with this before we start breaking down these games, how impressed have you been with Indiana? Because again we talked about these three. Let's talk about the number one team. How impressed have you been with the Fighting Kirk Cignettis and now their Hoosier chant that has now just been taking the world by storm?
Incredibly impressed, unbelievably impressed. This is a team. This is to me the team that has looked and looks like the best team in the entire country. And look, the Alabama team that they beat was a good, not elite team. That Alabama team still has a ton of talent on it, but it also had its fair share of issues. The running game being first and foremost. That was an Alabama team that struggled to run the ball all season long, but there is still a ton of NFL talent on that Alabama team. There is still they have a guy in Jeremy Bernard at wide receiver who, although he was not named All SEC, and I have a real problem with that actually, he to me was one of the top receivers in the SEC. He was their Swiss Army knife. He was their go-to guy all season long. So I say all that to say Alabama was not elite. Alabama was not, one of the best four teams, but they were still a very good football team. Indiana dismantled them. They beat them in every phase of football in that game, and it wasn't even close. And there's a play that stood out to me in that game, and it's when Alabama went for it very early in the game, deep in their own territory, and they did this they lined up their running back Daniel Hill in the Wildcat, and they tried to do this pop pass to Jeremy Bernard. And what I was so impressed by Indiana on that play with is the fact that they seemed to know exactly what was coming. And as somebody who has watched every snap that Alabama has played this year, that's a play, or not that exact play, but they try to get Jeremy Bernard the ball in creative ways a lot, right? So I wasn't shocked to see that on 4th and 1, and neither was Indiana. And that's what was so impressive to me is that team is unbelievably disciplined. They're unbelievably sure of who they are. They're incredibly well-rounded. They ran for more yards than Alabama gained in total. And I couldn't I could not be more impressed. I can't say enough about Kurt Signetti, what they've done, and how good that team is.
1,000%. I think the best part about this team is that there's a group unison of that this team's better than the team that it was last year. And it was because of Fernando Mendoza has done really well. And I'll sit here and I'll say this as someone who watches college football religiously. I did not watch a lick of California football last year.
No.
Who's watching Cal Berkeley? But to see like, Cal, this is what you had, and this is who he becomes. It's an amazing feat. And then you get Ramon Hemby out the transfer portal. You have a 1-2 combination in that running back room. You have a great receiving core. The offensive line that on paper does not look good. Uh, their size of them, we all on the precipice of knowing that you have to win the trenches. We're all like, well, Alabama clearly out muscles these guys. The average of Alabama's size is 320 pounds, where it looks like Indiana's average is only like 200, maybe 305 max. And they were moving bodies. And so I'm with you. I think Indiana has done a fantastic job in it all. But you did lead me down to the SEC conversation of it all before we get
Okay.
into these games too. The reign of dominance has now been trending. Clearly, Paul Feinbaum, we've heard him the last couple of days on television, and everyone who's a SEC fan has now hit their moment of like, is the reign of dominance over? Are you in that boat of like that reign of SEC dominance is over, and how have we gotten to this point?
Yeah, so I think it's very clear because there will be a Big Ten team in the national championship game, guaranteed. And to me, the winner of that Indiana Oregon game will likely be the favorite. Not saying they're necessarily going to win, but I think they'll be the favorite in the national championship game. So if that does happen, if one of those teams wins, it'll be the third straight year with the Big Ten champion. And not only the third straight year with the Big Ten champion, but it will be three different Big Ten teams who have won the championship. And for so many years, it was like, okay, there's six different SEC teams that can win a title from Georgia to LSU to Alabama to Florida to Auburn has had their moments. But in the Big Ten, it was really just Ohio State. Ohio State was the only one playing at that level. And I think it's pretty clear now that at the very top of the Big Ten, there are a number of programs that can compete at the highest level. We've seen Ohio State do it for years, but obviously Michigan won a national championship a couple years ago. Oregon and Indiana now have to be in that
Both teams
conversation.
been in the playoffs now.
Look, this one might be controversial, but USC is bringing in the number one recruiting class in the country. I know the results haven't always been there on the field yet under Lincoln Riley, but I still believe they're building that program the right way. I do think that the Big Ten at the very top, the top five, matches up incredibly well with the SEC.
The bowl records will also agree with you too. We always talk about these matchups, and the Big Ten SEC bowl games are probably the most heated
Yeah,
competitively when you talk about brand supremacy. Vanderbilt was what we called a playoff caliber team,
that one was eye
and
opening.
Iowa, a team of no offense, puts up 34 points. So I'm with you. I think we are in this new age of where parity is finally kicking in. Where, and I say that because the COVID kids are starting to move out. We're starting to finally see the development of like you can turn your roster around in a blink of an eye if you're Indiana, or if you have all these guys who aren't just buried under Alabama, Georgia depth chart, finding other ways to allocate themselves into being in the best position. I still think the SEC might be the most deeper conference from top to
Agree.
bottom, but I
Agree.
do think we're going to have more of a well, you guys beat each other up, so now we don't really know how good you are because now FanDuel said the best team, the best way to go for the SEC, and this is preseason we discussed when I had you a while ago, was that 10-2 was the best you can get out of the SEC, where Ohio State was clearly favored, and they were one of the few teams that was favored to be a one-loss team, and that was only because of the Michigan game, and everyone eyed that. Or the so I that's where I still sit, where one is deeper, but
Yeah,
clearly the Big Ten is saying we are here to play, and not only are we going to get deeper, we are going to get more diverse because there's a moment where everyone has the SEC reign of dominance, but it's only like one team that's dominant for 2 to 3 years, and then it shifts
yeah,
to another. Same way with the ACC, honestly, where the ACC had their moment where Florida State was really good. for a moment, and then Clemson takes over, and now we're starting to get a disbursement of who can be what. So I think it's all for the better in this sport that we call
I
college.
agree. I agree. I think it's great to have different regions involved in the sport, different fan bases involved in the sport. Like, look, Darius, you know me. I mean, I love Maryland. I'm a Terps guy through and through. For years and years and years, Indiana and Maryland and Rutgers were three peas in the pod, right at the bottom of that Big Ten East. It was just a matter of who was going to finish fourth, fifth, and sixth, right? That was the ceiling for those programs. Basically, I know Indiana had a decent year during COVID when Michael Penix was there, but for the most part, those three could not get out of the cellar of that Big Ten East. And to see Indiana do what they've done and ascend to the really top of the sport, I think it's a really encouraging thing for everybody who is a fan of a program that isn't a blue blood. I always say every school has at least one person who cares as much about that program as the top of the fan bases at Alabama,
Yes.
at Ohio State, at Michigan, at USC, right? And so I'm a big believer and I'm a big proponent of making this, of wanting to see this be a sport where you can feel like you have hope. If you're a Maryland fan, like me, if you're a Georgia Tech fan, if you're a Boston College fan, a Syracuse fan, right? So I love what I'm seeing right now from the sport.
This is amazing. I'm with you. I think as the sport grows, because that's the only thing it can do, it's the second biggest sport in America behind the NFL. We're going to start seeing the quote unquote little guy, like you said, of Maryland or even Vanderbilt and how they've done it with Diego Pavia. Now, whether they can keep that momentum going, that's a TBD post Pavia. But we're all seeing this thing where like everyone has a chance at this pie, and the playoffs itself is probably by far, I want to say, the best indication of it, because in the 4 team era, we wouldn't have gotten a 5, a 1, a 6, and a 10 in. We wouldn't even came close to
Yeah.
seeing that. This is by far the most diverse playoff we've seen, and definitely the most diverse in the second iteration of the 12 team era. I want to dive into these matchups, and I first want to knock out the Big Ten. I feel like that's the easiest one because, again, these are two teams that seen each other before. It's hard to win again in a rematch. But who do you have and why?
Yeah, so when I look at this game, I look at these two teams as the two most well-rounded teams left in the bracket, but maybe the two most well-rounded teams in the entire sport. I just talked about Indiana, and when you look at that team, it is so hard to find a weakness. They run the ball really well. Alabama played a ton of man coverage and blitzed Fernando Mendoza a bunch. In fact, I got the stats pulled up right here. They blitzed him 12 times. He went 8 for 8, 161 yards, 3 touchdowns against 5 or more pass rushers in that game. Fernando Mendoza is a quarterback that, even though he won the Heisman Trophy, I still feel like he slides a little bit under the radar if you can as a Heisman Trophy winner. And we had Devin
He's
Gardner, the
not the
former
sports
Michigan
car.
quarterback. What's that?
He's not the sports car.
No, he's not the sports car. So this is my point right here. Actually, we had Devin Gardner, former Michigan quarterback, on the Texas show I produced, the Stampede, with Vince Young, Mac Brown, and Bob Ballou, and we had him on to kind of break down the Citrus Bowl ahead of that matchup, Texas and Michigan, but also talk a little bit about just college football in general. And what Devin said about Fernando Mendoza was a couple things that stood out to me. He raved about his footwork, and he said so much of what Fernando is good at and what really allows him to excel happens before the snap. And I think what he did against Alabama against the blitz is evidence of that, right? So I have a ton of trust in Fernando Mendoza. It's hard for me to find a weakness with this Indiana team. Now, what I'm really interested in seeing in this game, though, and you mentioned it, they did play earlier this year. Indiana went on the road to Eugene. They win.
So you were talking about Oregon, and then you talked about the last time they played each other. I want you to keep going into that. Like, why is that so important, especially when they have this rematch?
Okay, yeah, so I'm incredibly interested to see how Dante Moore responds in this game because he is very talented quarterback, but he was an inexperienced quarterback, just 6 games in to being a starter at Oregon the last time they played. And Indiana got after him in that game. They sacked him 6 times. He threw a couple picks, and obviously Dante Moore has grown and developed since that game. And I really want to see how much he's grown and developed. I mean, we're looking at a potential matchup of the possibly top 2 quarterbacks drafted in next year's draft. Dante Moore, after that JMU game, was starting to get a lot of hype as a top quarterback in the upcoming draft, right? And that hadn't really been something that had been much on my mind, just because he's a first-year starter. But you forget he has been around college football a while. So I want to see how much Dante Moore has grown and was able to learn from that game. And he's got to avoid, and Oregon has to avoid getting behind the chains. It's something that Indiana does so well on the other side, is they just stay ahead of the chains. They stay ahead of the chains, and it enables them to be the best third down conversion team in the entire country because they just stay on track. Can Oregon stay on track? Can Dante Moore keep them on track? And can he make some big explosive plays for them as well? One thing I do have my eye on in this game is that they're going to be without Jordan Davison, one of their running backs. He's out for this game. They still have Noah Whittington, who's their other running back, but can they run the ball? Because Indiana, they sit in this too high shell, right? They have those two safeties deep, and they kind of dare you to run the ball on them. And I think for anybody to beat Indiana, they're going to have to run the ball. They're going to have to get them out of that shell. They're going to have to get a
1000%.
safety to come down, and then they're going to have to take advantage of it with some deep plays. So that's why I'm so fired up for this matchup. Is I want to see how Oregon and Dan Lanning have evolved since that game. I want to see how they adjust. I want to see how Dante Moore can adjust. But for me, it's just hard to go against Indiana. I think they're the most well-rounded team left. I think they're the most well-rounded team in the sport, and it's just hard for me to pick against them. But I think it's going to be an awesome game. By no means would I expect this to be a blowout.
Well, we said that about Alabama, Indiana, and that turned into a blowout. So let's hold our tongue. Nah, but I am with you. I don't expect this to be a blowout either. And again, last time they did play, and I have the numbers up too, Dante Moore only threw for 186 yards. He was hit a bunch, hit the ground 6 times, and he threw 2 picks. And like you said, how mature are you now versus then? But also, Dante Moore in these playoff games hasn't looked fantastic by any sort of stretch. He's looked good, don't get me wrong, but he hasn't had no wow moment. But he can put that ball on a freaking tightrope and put it where it's like, oh my gosh. And like you said, Indiana two's high shell, and one of their best things is they are a great run stopping team. They will they will take that away from you. This is a personnel grouping of Oregon that I saw in the Texas Tech game that I when I watched that and I was like, Texas Tech's personnel when it comes, I mean, Oregon's personnel when it comes to running the ball is just vastly different. And now there's a part two to it. And I don't know where Oregon will sit, like you said, with Davis out and Noah Whittington. Will you be able to be the I can take the punches, I can keep rolling, I can keep going? Because there's moments where you do have to come out. You have to be, we have to get the switch hitter in. Now in this game, we're going to need you to be the everyman type of guy. You only missed 2 games. Is this really when the weeks 15, 16, 17 starts catching up to you as a running back? And I know it's going to affect everybody here, but is this when like we finally get to see the anguish of having to have a longer season than usual start to take its toll, specifically on the running back who has to take those poundings up the middle? Indiana, I'm with you 100%. I think with Fernando Mendoza and what they do well is having a perfect balance. One thing I don't think they get enough credit for is that their offense has a really good balanced attack where they're not overly relying on one side of the fence than others. And if they can stay in front of the sticks, like you said, I think this is where Oregon is going to find themselves fighting for air and trying to get off the field, and it's going to take a while. Indiana does really good at having these long, sustaining, grind them out drives where they'll hold the ball 6, 7 minutes. And even if it doesn't amount to a touchdown, it'll just put your defense at a disadvantage. And because your offense may not be able to even hold the ball for that long, knowing how fast Oregon is, you're going to need those moments where you're just like, hey, we're going to have to slow down. We have to give our big boys and our defensive backs a little bit of oxygen. Can Oregon pace themselves against Indiana and make this a pacing match? I don't think if this is a shootout either that Indiana is also safe because Oregon has proven that they have the speed to just put up points and then get back out there. But if this is a grind out game, it will come down to how much wind is left in that reserve tank for Oregon. I think Indiana is by far the most well-rounded team, one of the most balanced teams. So I could see it. And ESPN has the line at 3.5. I think that's very good for both of these teams.
Can I ask you a little bit more of a narrative question here,
Go
Darius?
ahead.
Because I think 3 years now, you ask any fan of a college football team, and if you ask them, if your coach retired or was fired tomorrow, who would you want as his replacement? And the number one answer is going to be Dan Lanning, right? I think that's been pretty much a consensus the last few years. Like he's the young, hot, up and coming coach who seems like he has it all.
Yeah.
Now, do you think if they lose this game, because Dan Lanning has avoided a lot of the heat that has come to a guy like Ryan Day over the past couple of years. If they lose this game, and I know they're not the favorite, you're now looking at 3 seasons in a row where Oregon lost in 2023. They lost twice to Kalen DeBoer in Washington, including in the Pac-12 championship game. Last season, they had an undefeated regular season. They were the 1 seed. They get blown out by Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. And then this year, they would get to the semifinal round, of course, but still come up short again. I personally don't believe Dan Lanning should get any heat, but do you think he does start to get some heat? Because when you look at that, is that any different than what Ryan Day was doing the past couple of years when people were saying he should potentially be fired before that playoff run last season?
I will add this to the possibility. I feel like it would have been more of a conversation if they were in the Pac-12 because when he was in that Pac-12, Oregon should have been the cream of the crop in the Pac-12. But then you had a Kyle Whittingham team of Utah with Cam Rising having those teams that could just beat you. And it's like, whoa, that should not happen. If this was the Pac-12 Oregon, yes. But because of your first year in the Big Ten, you are able to win a conference championship, be undefeated, and it's not like you lost to anybody. You end up losing to what would become the eventual champs. I think there's a different bit of a grace period because you beat them in the regular season. They just happen to figure out guys out, and then the question of rest versus rust kicks in. I think narratively speaking, Dan Lanning should be okay. I'm with you on that end, but it will start to have bells ring out. But also, Oregon isn't a program as good as it is, as high profile it is. It's also a program that's never been here. Like they've never sniffed that. Well, they've had chances. They've been in
Well,
the playoffs.
they've been
They,
close. They've
yeah,
been close.
but in terms of like, they aren't the team that you would think of as like a Georgia, a Alabama of its
Sure.
past. Hell, even a LSU. Miami always gets the conversation of are they back?
Yeah.
They're not in that realm of conversation. They're always the close but no cigar. You have the
Look,
roster, you have the talent, but there's something missing.
I just asked the question because sometimes I'm surprised by how kind of quickly things turn for coaches. I have been for a while a big defender of Ryan Day, even when he was losing to Michigan, because
Yeah,
there was a time where Ryan Day basically only lost to top 5 teams, essentially.
and
Like that
people
was the
wanted him
only
fired.
game that he actually lost, and people were calling for his head. And I've always found it interesting that like he would get so much heat, but other coaches would maybe get more grace. I think I love Dan Lanning. I think he will win a national championship. I think he will win a national championship at Oregon. I'm just sometimes get surprised by how quickly the narrative turns. And so I was just curious if you thought this could be a narrative turning game.
I do think it can be. That's the thing. I think it can be a narrative turning game, but I don't think the voices will be as loud as what we're both perceiving it could be on the
Yeah.
Ryan Day level or even the James Franklin level at that because each year he's been at Oregon
Another
there
great example. Yeah.
there has been progress. So I think because there's always progress and there hasn't been a sense of regression, there's always something that you're like, "Oh, okay." Because in the 4 team era before he got there, it was a Chip Kelly team and it was like, "Oh, they can do that." Then you have those years where you don't have Chip Kelly and you have Mario Cristobal, and even Mario Cristobal teams are. I think Mario Cristobal at Oregon was probably the closest to that Penn State Ryan Day James Franklin narrative because it was like you should be because at that moment that's when the Pac-12 was you have to go through Oregon. Where when Dan takes over, when Lanning takes over, it's more of an open conversation where Utah started making its name. Washington started making its name. We started seeing those other teams start matching the Oregon dominance. But then you get to the Big Ten, and I think everyone said it. Well, when these Pac-12 California teams, when this West Coast gets over here and find what real football is about in the winter, they're not going to be able to fit. And Dan Lanning, with all that intensity, goes, well, I'll show you, and then wins in his first year in a new conference. I think that helps a lot,
I agree.
narratively speaking. Where if it was just like you got here and you immediately fall to the bottom, like Cincinnati did when they make the transition from the group of five into the Big 12, it's a whole different conversation. So Lanning does give himself a little bit of a cushion because each year there is a state of improvement. Now, will there be a narrative conversation? I do think there will. I think there will, because now you're looking at Indiana is doing something that should never happen. A coach gets there and year one, you're in the playoffs. Year two, you're on the verge of playing for a national championship. That should never happen. Usually it should be, well, year three is when we should see the leap. Year four is when we should see the leap because now your recruiting class that you recruited is developed. But again, we are in the era of transfer portal. So I think there's more pressure not on Indiana and Kirk Cignetti, but teams that want to aspire to have this turnaround. And everyone's just going to be like, they use the Tony Stark meme of he built this in a cave in 3 days, like with a box of
No
scraps.
doubt. No doubt. Kurt Cignetti has upped the heat on every other aspiring program in the country. Every fan base, every fan is looking around this week and saying, well, Indiana did it. Why can't we?
Everybody, and even Georgia Tech was close. So now you're bringing all this in. So I think there's two different narratives that will start to come in for aspiring programs if Indiana wins, but there also will be that growing narrative like, hey, Dan, your clock isn't ticking, but it is. We just want you to know it is there now. Your seat won't be hot, but we just want you to know there is a clock
Yeah.
now. You got to
And
at
it
least
shouldn't
play in
be,
this
in my
game.
opinion. It shouldn't be.
No, I think he's in the right place. I feel like program fit and coaching fit matters. Dan is in the right location to where he can put an imprint on him, which the same way how I assumed Lane Kiffin would be when we had that conversation on If I Were the Committee many, many moons ago, where I was like, you should stay, where this is the best place for you to win. And I'm with you. I think at some point Oregon will win a national championship. Dan Lanning will be the head coach of that team when they do. It's just a matter of time and when the
Yeah.
right storm comes about. So that's all it is on that one. Who do you got winning this game before we transition? I know
Yeah,
you
I
kind of
think
hinted
I
at it a
have to
little
go with
bit.
Indiana. I can't go against Indiana. I just think they're too well rounded. I think they're too complete. I think they're too disciplined. They have an identity. They know who they are, and they execute almost to perfection week in and week out. So I cannot go against the Hoosiers.
I like that. I went against the Hoosiers one time and it was in the Rose Bowl. I learned my lesson. I will not do that again. Clearly I was wrong. And sometimes you gotta eat crow, as they say. And I refuse to have to eat that twice. So give me Indiana in that game too. But just the disclaimer, in the bracket challenge, I did have Oregon winning a national championship.
Ooh.
So hey, two things can be said and two things can be true on different platforms. So if you don't see this and you only look at my bracket and it comes to true fruition, I told you guys so. But if you guys see this, don't say nothing in the comments. I will fight back. uh let's get to the game that I think everyone has been raving about because of the stories and the narratives about it. Miami Ole Miss, they will play at the time of this video. It's Wednesday. They'll be playing today because I'm gonna drop this on Thursday. They'll be playing today, which is Thursday when this video drops again for people who are listening in the car home, or if you happen to have YouTube on in the background. How do you see this game folding out? The narratives of this all. Before we even do like a combined thing, let's start specifically on Ole Miss. Where do you see Ole Miss in this? How far have they come, and how impressed that you've been with Ole Miss, given what's going on right now with even coaches flying back and forth to Baton Rouge and Mississippi?
Yeah, I said it at the top of the show. They were the biggest surprise to me coming out of the quarterfinal round. Just The fact that they were able to beat Georgia was something I did not see coming at all. I did not think they had the defense to do it. I thought Georgia had figured a lot of things out themselves defensively since they met in the middle of the season, but the deep passing game exposed Georgia once again. It was a problem for them all season. They were a little banged up in the secondary there throughout the course of that game, and Ole Miss really took advantage. And Trinidad Chambliss had an unbelievable game. So I've been unbelievably impressed with Ole Miss in that game, what they've been able to do, kind of using Lane Kiffin's departure as a motivation under new head coach Pete Golding. I think when you look at this game, to me, it kind of comes down to who can dictate the tempo and the pace. If it's a shootout, then I like Ole Miss's chances. If it's a grinded out game, then I like Miami's chances here.
That's been the story of Miami, and someone who's watched both these teams very up close, very detailed. Miami is a team that I think towards the end of the regular season, they shown they can play in those games where you need to have a shootout, but it's also hard to do. So I'm with you where if it's a grind out, you'll go Miami. If it's a shootout, you'll go Miss. I want to dive on Miami a little bit. We hear a lot about the defense. We've heard about Keem Mesidor. We've heard about Bain. We've heard about Scott. We've heard about Jacoby Thomas. We've heard about all these guys. I want to talk about Carson Beck. How impressed have you been with him on these last, what, 5 games he's played, regular season included? We're talking about these 2 bowl games against 2 very great defenses and how he's just managed the game very well. How impressed have you been with Carson Beck?
Yeah, I've been impressed with him for sure. It's maybe a little bit of a I don't know if, yeah, I guess bias is the right word, but it's hard to get that Louisville game out of your head sometimes, where he threw 4 picks, but he has not been that guy. I thought they've done a really nice job of leaning on their running game. I can't say enough about Mark Fletcher. I mean, I love that guy and the way he runs, and his story is unbelievable. Kind of playing for his dad who passed away, who was a lifelong Hurricanes fan. I love that and everything that he has been doing there. So I've been incredibly impressed with their running game. I've been impressed with the way that Carson Beck has managed the game and he hasn't turned the ball over. Look, when you talk to coaches, the more you talk to coaches, the more you kind of learn that they feel like more games are lost than won. So not losing the game as a quarterback is huge when you have a running game like that, you have a defense like that, and then you have a playmaker like Malachi Tony and Carson's done a great job of getting the ball into his hands. So yeah, I have been impressed with Carson Beck. Now, of the 4 quarterbacks left, where would you rate him among the four?
4. I
Four,
take that
yeah.
back. 3. I rate him at 3 because just how you said you can't take those 4 turnovers against Louisville out your head. I can't take the record of that. And it's what about to be his 41st start and against top 25, top 15 opponents. He's above 500, not just barely 500. He's above 500. That's also a glaring stat that you can't take out of my head where you are consistent from Georgia to now. And I'm with you. There was a bias of who Carson Beck to Miami. Which Carson Beck are we getting? Are we getting the 2 years ago Carson Beck? Or are we going to get this past season of Georgia Carson Beck, the one who had to be Superman but was more like Clark Kent with all these turnovers? I think Carson Beck doesn't get enough credit for what he's done and had to manage this offense. And him and Shannon Dawson happened to be a perfect marriage, just like how it was with Cam Ward last year. You got a guy who believes in the system, who trusts in the system, and can not only do that, but can take it from the classroom to the field. And he does it very well. I think Carson Beck would be 3. So rating them all, I go, mm, mm, ah, this Trinidad Mendoza Beck more. Trinidad physically, skill wise, there's a lot that he can do that Mendoza can't. And I just mean that with his legs and being a play extender that way. Mendoza winning the Heisman gives him that nod and being able to decipher a defense very well. He's very surgical. If you haven't paid attention to him, I think we all are now, and how precise he is with throwing the ball. He knows where to go with that ball. He knows how to get it out of his hands early. He knows how to get it out. He has great timing. Again, Carson Beck, we have 2 versions of him. but we also have a more consistent version, I believe, of him being on the good side of who he is versus on the bad side. When we talk about the interceptions, we go to Louisville, and then we go after that. He really didn't have a bad moment except the SMU interception. Other
Yeah.
than that, that was we're looking at Carson
I,
Beck for the
I have
rest
a
of that
few
season.
stats for you here. Following that SMU game, that they haven't lost since that SMU game, right? That was their second loss. They're
Yep.
6-0. Carson Beck has thrown 15 touchdowns to one interception over that time. And he has a 75% completion percentage over those last six games. So I think those numbers really speak volumes
And
about
that
the way
matters.
way he's played down the stretch.
And I think that matters. Like it's hard, like you said, it's hard to get that game out your head. But it's also hard to get the rest of that season out your head because you're like, well, that was a terrible performance. And we all saw it and we all can virtually agree with the assumption. We all went, here's the Carson we knew. And then Carson goes, okay, this is who you know. Let me show you who I really am. He's efficient. And he's starting to use his legs. That Ohio State game, something that you didn't have to see him do. He's probably the least touched quarterback in terms of being sacked because of that offensive line out of these four teams. Him and Mendoza, the least two who are touching the mat. And not only is he standing upright, he's commanding the offense. He's picking them apart. And no, you're not going to see him have these crazy 400-yard games. He's very precise. And the Ohio State game specifically, like I said, with his legs, we started to see him be more decisive where he wanted to go with the ball. And it was like a third down play, 3rd and 11, I believe, where he just drops back. There's nothing available, or it was like a 3rd and 7, and he just takes off. He uses his legs, something you wouldn't even fathom because he's not a mobile guy. He's not going to beat you with his legs, but we're starting to see the confidence. And again, I said earlier in the show, Shannon Dawson and Mario Cristobal are like, yeah, he's healthy. Where you're telling us this
Makes a
entire
difference.
season, literally this entire season, we've watched an unhealthy quarterback go out there and win these games. And now we're seeing him be healthy, where he has a lot more torque. He has a lot more strength in the arm. And the offense is feeding off of that. And they get the ball to Malachi Tony. And then they have all these other weapons. They have CJ Daniels. They have all these guys, JoJo Trade. They are finding ways to now operate differently. And I think the Ohio State game was a great coming out party for Carson Beck, although the numbers won't say it. But the eye in the sky never lies. That's what we're always taught. And we saw him be decisive, know where he wants to go, use his legs when he needs to, get the ball out of his hands quick, make the right throw. I give him that, and that's why I say he would sit there at 3. You asked me that question. How would you organize it?
I think I would just go slightly different. I think I would go Mendoza number one. I just have so much respect for what he's been able to do this season and the way he was able to. Again, I'll go back to it. Just handling the blitz against Alabama. I mean, he dissected that Alabama defense when they went after him. So I have to go for Fernando number one. I would go Trinidad number two. And then it's hard between Dante Moore and Carson Beck, but I think I would give Carson Beck the nod just for that experience factor, just because he has started 40 some odd games. He's been in the biggest moments, the brightest lights, and he really has performed over the past couple weeks here. And it's not a knock on Dante Moore at all. I'm really high on Dante Moore. I just think there's four good quarterbacks, to be honest with you.
Dante is a first round graded quarterback. So
Yeah.
as we're saying this, we are in the agreement that yeah, you are a first round graded quarterback, but there is an experience level that this guy Carson has that is by far untouched out of everybody here in this. And I've said it in my first Brockettology for the first round that I was like, there's something about experience that I would lean on when it comes to Carson, and we got to see it in that Texas A&M game, and then we got to see it in Ohio State. This game, I think, does come down to defense, just like every other game. Defense wins championships. I think it's the physicality of Miami's front four. If they can get to Trinidad, and Miami hasn't had to play a lot of mobile quarterbacks. They played Marcel Reed. They've played
And they sacked him six times or
they
seven
played
times, I think.
yeah, they
Yeah.
played Tommy Castellanos at Florida State, and then they played Jennings out of SMU.
SMU. Yeah.
Those are 3 mobile quarterbacks. That's not a lot, but that are 3. And Byron Brown, who was a tank. So 4 mobile quarterbacks all of them you've kind of taken that test and you've done right. Then you had Jacoby Thomas who comes downhill and he's blowing up quarterbacks if you even try to catch him in one-on-one. Keontae Scott's blowing dudes up if you try to meet him at one-on-one. But the physicality of that defensive line is where I'll give Miami that slight edge at. But I'm with you. If it's a shootout, Ole Miss has it because Trinidad Chambliss is going to be running a lot. There's going to be design runs. There's going to be scrambles to extend the plays. And I don't think Miami's the most disciplined assigned when it comes to that. When it comes to having to plays be extended, that's when you can see the defense get caught a little bit watching and then trying to have to make something happen or make up for it.
Yeah, and if you look back at that A&M game, they did sack Marcel Reed 7 times in that game, but even with those 7 sacks, he still ended up with 27 rushing yards. I thought when he did get out of the pocket, he was able to move on them a little bit. So I mean, to still end up with nearly 30 rushing yards after getting sacked 7 times, because that's all negative yardage, is pretty unbelievable. I wish I had the numbers right in front of me where I could see how many just positive yards he gained, because I remember that game. I felt like he was very effective when he was able to get out of the pocket and move. So I mean, it's definitely something to watch for. Uh, but still, that Miami defense. I mean, it's hard to go against them. You mentioned the trenches. If you were to just kind of take the jerseys and helmets off these teams and say one of these teams is an ACC team and one of these teams is an SEC team, kind of just using what you traditionally think, Miami looks like the SEC team.
Yeah, they clearly do. The average offensive line, by the way, 6'5", 330. That's their average. And they have a first round, a top 10 pick in Francis Mawinoa. Uh first team all ACC, probably an all-American who rightfully so will be taken in the NFL draft this year. I'm with you. Also, what scares me, and when we talk about the defense, and I say me, and I mean me from the fan perspective, but even just watching the game, Miami does not have a lot of depth on their defensive line. And a team that runs this level of tempo, who averages, they snap the ball with 20 seconds left on a game on a play clock. That's what Ole Miss does. They run fast. So analytically speaking, and from the fan thought processes, how long? Same thing with Oregon, how long are you going to be out there on the field? And if they tempo you left and right, left and right, left and right, are you going to be able to have your win to get them? And again, the story is old as time. Get them behind the sticks, get them behind the 8 ball. How often is you going to get that if you got a guy by the name of Trinidad Chambliss who can just make magic happen with his legs? And then you have a bowling ball in Keywan Lacey who can also smash you in the face downhill. I think that's where it comes down to. Offensively, Miami I think is in a better position because they are playing against one of the bottom 6 SEC run defenses, which means you should have a pretty good day. Fletcher should have a pretty good day on the ground. Can Miami match that and be able to grind them and punch them in the mouth and make them have to? Because you're only going to be as good as one of these two quarterbacks not being on the field. It's which quarterback will be on the field less, really.
Right. And in that first Georgia game, the one that Ole Miss lost, Georgia went for 221 yards on the ground. So I mean, I know we haven't gotten to the predictions yet, but I'm gonna give you my prediction right now anyway. I like Miami, and I like Miami kind of big here, to be honest with you. I like Miami to just impose their will on this game. I like them to run the ball. I like their defense to really get after Trinidad Chambliss. I know that the mobile quarterback is always the X factor. It's always, when you have a magician back
Yes.
there at quarterback, like he can wreck your whole game plan. But you know who can wreck your whole game plan? Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor. Those are two guys that can wreck your whole game plan. I just love the way that Miami is built in the trenches. I love how they run the ball, and I love that they do have a playmaker like Malachi Tony. So I think the Canes win, and they go to their first national championship game since 2001.
I'm with you, but I'm also want to add this. And always said this is a problem and this is an era that we live in that matters. Coaching matters. And I do think having now, we don't know how Lane Kiffin's treating his assistants here, but there has been more conversations like those guys having to go to Baton Rouge, then having to
Yeah.
come back. This is probably the worst time of having them be floaters. How much does that take into account where Miami's been fairly consistent
Yeah.
with their coaching staff, just like, We're all here. Granted, no one's up and left and going to a new program in general, but you don't have that looming cloud of, well, is Charlie Weiss here on Monday or is he going to be here on Tuesday? Well, we kind of
Y-
need him no later than Wednesday so we can start doing this. I think coaching, when it comes down to it, that's also the X factor of how much of that offensive staff
y-
has put together this game plan.
You know what, Darius? I got this to say. If either Ole Miss or Oregon, because both the Oregon's coordinators are going to be head coaches elsewhere next year, if either of those programs win the national championship next year, I don't want to ever hear from a coach again, from a head coach again, that you need to be in the building for 21 hours a day and that you need to sleep in your office in order to win a national championship, because that will prove that's absolutely not true, because these critical members of this staff are pulling double duty during the most critical time of the year.
And they're working later and later and later. It's not like, unfortunately, with Ohio State with Brian Hartline, where it was just like, oh, we just had to worry about this one game because we had the bye week, and then we can see what happens next. It's like, no, we needed you for the first round. We needed you for the second round. Now we need you for the third round. And even then, the coaching staffs wanted to be there to finish out the season. So I'm with you. We do not need to hear any more coaching. I don't care if you're Urban Meyer. I don't care if you're Nick Saban. You guys, I don't want to hear, oh, you got to spend 45 hours in here to sleep at night. You might as well get a bed. No, this is proof. If either of those two teams win it, that'll be proof that your coaching staff can work double duty. If your players have the mindset to win, you will have the mindset to win.
Exactly.
We are coming down to the end of it. You gave me your prediction. I also added mine. Before we leave, expansion conversation,
Hmm.
real quick. What's your number and why?
I don't hate 16. I'm really let me start with this. I'd be perfectly happy to stay at 12. Now, this whole Notre Dame automatically gets in if they're in the top 12 thing is a little bit of a
Not a fan.
wrinkle in that. I don't love it either. I would be fine with 16, but I'm really, really adamant that they should not go past 16. I like 16 because it is a perfect bracket. You can have 116, 215, so on and so forth. And I would have liked to have seen I would have liked to seen Vanderbilt and what they could do. Now Iowa kind of proved maybe they weren't as good as we thought. I wouldn't have minded seeing Texas and a Texas team that was playing that was a Texas team that was playing much better down the stretch.
Yes.
And I think we saw a lot of growth from Arch Manning over the course of that season. And it would have been interesting to see what they can do. So, look, I'm never going to complain about more football. I still think, even at 16, I do think the regular season is very important. It would still be very important. I do want to make I want to stand up here on my soapbox though and say I know there's been so much complaining about the G5, right? I want to continue to see the G5 get an opportunity. I think what we're seeing right now is a little bit of a result of we've seen so many of the great G5 programs of the past 10, 15, 20 years actually work their way into the power conferences. I mean, you just look at the Big
Yeah.
12 with Cincinnati and USF and Houston. That's a lot of the talent that was at the G5 level has now actually transitioned its way up. But guys, you don't need to go back that far. Just last season to look at Boise State and Ashton Jeanty and what that team was and how they actually did compete with Penn State in that game to see that it is entirely possible that there is a G5 team that can compete. I really don't want to see that taken away because I think it's critically important that fan bases throughout the country do feel like they are part of this sport. I've seen so many people suggest the G5 should have their own playoff. And what I keep going back to is I keep seeing quotes from G5 coaches that say, we absolutely don't want that. We want to be part of this whole thing. We want to be part of this real playoff, the FBS, because if they didn't want that, they just transitioned down to FCS. So
1000%.
to me, I understand why people were frustrated by the blowouts. I understand that it wasn't enjoyable to watch JMU get crushed by Oregon. And they were crushed. Like people will say, well, they covered, they put up points. I mean, Oregon was playing its twos and threes a ton in that
Yeah.
second half, but I think you don't have to go back that far just a year ago to see that there are programs and as you know things continue to evolve and some of these programs that are have this opportunity in the G5 now that programs like UCF and Houston and Cincinnati are no longer there. A program like USF is a great example that had a really nice season. I think you will start to see some of those programs develop, and of course you still always have Boise there. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all that a G5 team can win a playoff game. So let's keep the G5 in. If we go to 16, there's no reason not to. I'm fine with 16. I don't want to go any higher than that.
You know, I've debated that school of thought for so long. You are the first person to make me almost like 16. You are the first one to almost make me like 16. I like 12. I believe you have to earn it on the field. And I think my issue with 16 is more so how coaches and conference commissioners complain about it, where they're like, we have to get the best teams in, the best teams in. Well, this year is the best teams. Yeah, you would have loved to see Texas, you would have loved to see Vanderbilt, but some of those answers were played on. And I'm with you. I'm not a fan of Notre Dame having that MOM in there saying if they are within the 12. I think there will be changes to the 12. I think the group of five does need to be in. Here's my dream format, and if they don't expand, here's how I like it. We don't need all this much break in between playoffs. I think 12 is
Yeah.
perfect. 12 is perfect. Incentivize, or I've also done 14, so I'll give you both. 12 is where I sit here, and I'll say this: get away from that extended moment. Bye still matter, but bye also comes with a first round, or it also comes with a home playoff. The New Year's Six, cycle two of those like how it was in the 4 team era. Two of those games will be a part of a New Year's Six. The other four will be gone for the first four out. Those teams will have those or the 4-6 out. That will also have New Year's Six games involved. Then you have your Pop Tarts Bowl and all that. So you have a lot that's in store, and you don't get teams like Notre Dame crying and wussing out of their moment. And my whole thing was we asked about what would it look like. Half of those teams you mentioned, we got to see what it would look like if they were in this field or they were in the playoff. Notre Dame shouldn't be in this conversation at this moment because they chose not to play in a bowl game. If you played that game against BYU and whether you won or lost, we could at least had a optical data point, like the committee always likes to talk about. This is what it would look like if they were, or what it could be if we got this as a playoff matchup. That's my thing for 12. 14, we do those last two teams or those last four teams. So 12, 13, what's my math? 11, 12,
Yeah,
13, 14.
11, yeah,
Boom.
11 through 14.
That's your wild card. Boom. You win that game, you're in the first round. Everything concedes as normal. Those last two teams, you guys that lost, you will still play for a New Year's Six bowl game.
I
That's
think it's
how
hard to ask a team to go play that game after losing in the playoff. I
I
do.
know, but come on. You worked hard for something.
Yeah.
You have to have some type of incentive or a reward for your hard work of the season. We
Yeah.
can't just do national championship or bust. We have to get out of that
I'm with you.
narrative where even people are we even have the argument of the conference championship game matter, and they do. So that's the only way I can coax these programs into being like, hey, you're still playing for something. Don't just because you didn't because we're now looking at teams who were in the first round, their season ended. They didn't even get a watch or a swag
No,
bag. All they got
I
was a home
agree.
playoff game.
You know, I mentioned it, but Texas is a program that I follow very closely, and the vibes around Texas, the feeling around that Texas program coming off of that Citrus Bowl win, they're high, man. They're high. Like
Yeah.
I think people who went down there, Texas fans had a great time going to Orlando for that game. The players who played really seemed to enjoy it. They played really hard. They got a great bowl experience. So, you know, in some ways, they might be at an advantage over a program like an A&M who lost in the first round of the playoff
Played
just
for nothing,
from a
technically.
reward perspective, from a ability to kind of like reset going into next season perspective. Of course, don't get me wrong. Your goal is you want to be involved in playing for a championship, and Texas wasn't, A&M was, Oklahoma was, but the feeling around that Texas program right now after that bowl win, I think is very different than the feeling around the Texas A&M program.
Imagine Oklahoma right now. You lost. Not only did you have a chance to win, you were up 17 to lose, and now you have to carry that entire feeling into the following year. Well, like you said, Texas, you might not have played for a national championship this year, but you played for a Citrus Bowl. Like you said, the vibes are high. You know, Arch Manning has a confidence of him that you know he's coming back. They're going to go into the portal and bring in so many guys. Like there's a different energy that you could feel versus Oklahoma or Texas A&M where you're just like, wah wah, you know?
Yep.
So that's just how I look at it. And again, you are the first person to make me somewhat like 16. I've stood on my soapbox, and you've heard me argue 12 is perfect. Play it on the field. If you are in, you're in. If you're not, you're not. Even if Miami, you even when they were coming out in the committee, and I've said if Miami doesn't get in, that's on them. They should have won the
Yep.
conference.
Yep.
I've stood 10 toes in this rhetoric of 12, earn it. And we got to see how you earn it. So I'm here with it. 16 wouldn't be bad. You've now brought me over just slightly to be like, okay, I'll concede at 16. But I don't want to hear no 2014 playoff model Tony
No,
Petitti.
please no.
Like, let's not go there. All right. We are coming down to the end. Tell them where they can find you, what you've been working on, who you're working with, because you do a lot. I know you're doing a lot, but let the people know what you've been up to.
Yeah, yeah. First off, thanks for having me, Darius. It's always fun. Brockettology, love the new name. But you can find me all across social media. It's at Gorgon Sports. It's the same handle everywhere. Talking football, talking basketball, talking college sports, talking DC sports, Baltimore sports. Really talking about it all. So please follow me wherever you consume social media at Gorgon Sports. Also, the producer of two college football based shows, The Dynasty, a podcast on the Alabama Crimson Tide with AJ McCarron, Trent Richardson, and Chris Stewart, and then The Stampede, a podcast on the Texas Longhorns, a podcast with Mac Brown, Vince Young, and Bob Ballou. They're great shows, even if you're not a fan of those teams. We just had Vince Young and Mac Brown talking about their memories of the 2006 Rose Bowl. The 20th anniversary was just a few days ago. You won't find stories like that anywhere else. So if you love college football at all, like we do, I mean, that's worth your listen to hear those legends talk about, to me, one of the greatest games that has ever been played in the history of the sport. I'm also covering Maryland basketball. So if you like watching teams that can't score the ball and have not yet won a Big Ten
Oh,
game, then you can check out all my coverage of the Terps on the Route 1 rundown. Look, it's been a long season, but that doesn't mean I'm going anywhere. I am covering it every single day on those social media platforms and on my podcast, the Route 1 Rundown. But thanks so much for having me, Darius. It's been a blast.
first and foremost, you didn't have to say it like that. Bad. Come on. Come on. We both
Hey
cover them.
man,
Come on.
I just
Don't do that. We're
I
both in the
can't
same boat.
sugarcoat it. I can't sugarcoat it. It is what it is.
All right. Yeah, okay, you're right. You're right. You are right. But if they do have a Miami podcast, count me in. Tell your boss. He knows me personally. Tell him to give me a ring.
You know it.
Thank you again for joining me. This has been fun. Let's hope we are right in our predictions, or if we are wrong, either way, I think we'll get a great national championship, no matter what the combination of teams we get here. Thank you guys for listening. If you guys love this content, let me know in the comments. Who did you have winning? What did your bracket look like at the beginning of this? Like, share, subscribe. I'm doing a lot more content. I post really a lot. I cover Maryland basketball as well. I post a lot of my stuff on LinkedIn with articles. But if you want long form content, short form content, let me know in the comments. I will see you guys later. Gorgie, I cannot thank you enough for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Darius. It's always a blast.
So until then, guys, I will see you on another episode of Brockettology.